You need to
I think maybe we have to build up some kind of an immune system where we can
yeah,
fight or rather live with it.
yeah. I think maybe it's recording now. So
Recording it started, yeah. How many participants have come? Yeah, Madhu, if you can share the YouTube link also, no? We can put it forward.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Kamini.
Hi. Hello. Oh, Kakulal sir, how are you, sir?
Yeah,
Fine, all good, sir. कैसे है आपकी
Yeah.
तबीयत कैसी है ठीक है
ठीक है,
Nice
ठीक है.
to see you.
My classmate.
you're looking good, Kulal.
I think we'll
Padmavati
start.
here. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think 15 is sufficient. More than 26. 25 people are there.
Yeah, I think we can start off.
Yeah.
We can start. Madhu will start. Madhu, you're sharing the screen?
We welcome all participants to the JNFAU Alumni Talks on Urban Design to Create Smart and Sustainable Cities. The talk includes projects and proposals by the speaker. The speaker for today's session is Dr. Sujata. Dr. Sujata S. Govada is an award-winning qualified urban designer, certified urban planner, and registered architect in India with over 35 years of experience on a diverse range of projects in Hong Kong, US, Philippines, India, and other regions. She is the CEO and Managing Director of UDP International, an award-winning global boutique practice based in Hong Kong since 1994, with representative offices in San Francisco and Hyderabad, India. Dr. Govada is an adjunct associate professor at School of Architecture, the University of Hong Kong. She is a global trustee of the Urban Land Institute ULI and was an EXICO member as well as the 2015 president of the Hong Kong chapter of American Institute of Architects. Besides being a founding vice president of Hong Kong Institute of Urban Design, she also worked as an advisor for World Bank on their transit-oriented development. Dr. Govada established the Institute for Sustainable Urbanization in 2014 in Hong Kong. With her eminent knowledge in the field of smart cities and her professional experience, she has gained a reputation as a thought leader in shaping smart, sustainable, resilient, livable, and walkable cities around the world. And the moderator for today's session is Professor Kamini Singh. Professor Kamini Singh is principal at SV College of Architecture, Hyderabad. She holds a bachelor's degree, SPA, JNFAU, and master's in housing from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. She has over 22 years of experience in academics and practice. Under her leadership, SV College of Architecture was conferred with Times Excellence Award under Best Private Colleges in Hyderabad in the year 2020. She has been a guest faculty at various institutes such as NICMAR, NIFT. Her areas of interest on which she's written and presented research papers include urban planning and housing. She's a member of Board of Studies at YSR Institute, JNFAU, and on Technical Advisory Committee at ICMR NIN. She is also the director in the firm ARCA Integrated Project Management along with her husband, architect Kuldeep Singh. The firm has many awards and recognition to its name and has recently been recognized under Top 10 Most Promising Project Management Consultant in India 2020 by Consultants Review magazine and Business Connect.
Yeah. Welcome, ma'am, Sujata ma'am, to this discussion. I was just going through your portfolio, and it was becoming very difficult to adjust all of this into one talk. And I was of the opinion that we should have many talks because each of this topic is so diverse, and there is so much to talk on any one of the topics that you have done. Generally, we have seen architects specializing only in urban design or only in planning, uh, only in conservation or the other branches, landscape. But when it comes to your work, I was amazed to see that you are involved in all of these, and just to make it a little more condensed, I thought we'll divide it into 4 categories. And though there is an overlapping and there could be a lot of interconnectivity between these subtopics, but I thought we could generalize them into 4 categories related to your urban design projects. We'll start off with the TOD that you're talking of, then the waterfront developments, urban regeneration and conservation, and the sustainability, where you're also talking of the net zero buildings that you have proposed. When it comes to urban design, ma'am, the first thing that comes to our mind, or rather for a common man or somewhere, result in a happy city. Finally, happiness is something which a common man looks forward. And it is this which we as architects should address too. Finally, for whom are we designing these cities? And we call ourselves as architects, planners, urban designers. So I'm reminded of what Charles Montgomery has told with regards to city. Happiness is a house with many rooms, but at its core is a hearth around which we gather with family, friends, the community, and sometimes even strangers to find the best part of ourselves, where we can relate to ourselves. We can, feel the sense of belonging and so on. So I hope as urban designers, we are able to address these issues. Looking at some of your master plan proposals, Sujata ma'am, you have talked about and you have stressed on transit-oriented development, the TODs, which we talk of. Now, when it comes to TODs, the very essence or the very purpose for which it is framed, looking into the walkability, where everything is within a walkable distance, the residential, business, the commercial, and finally around the transit stations, around the transit areas. So some few observations where is it that it is more feasible in a greenfield development rather than a brownfield development, or is it feasible in certain contexts, not feasible in certain contexts? One is that if you just throw some light on that. And then it is something like an extended land use and the transportation, you're connecting it. When we talk of development, the TOD, we are talking of development of land use. What about the other Ds when it comes to the density, for example, the diversity, and the other, the design of it? Are these not as important as only the development of land? Somewhere, what we have observed is only the development of land has been the more in focus, and the other criteria in some areas have been ignored. There is one example where transit-oriented stations, you can see the metro rail, for example, in Hyderabad. We were talking of the last mile connectivity. It has not really generated, and it is a kind of failure where we were not able to achieve the last mile connectivity. So as an urban designer, how would you see the TOD with respect to your projects, and what were the issues related to gentrification, because that is something induced gentrification, which you can say, and what in your opinion are the advantages or disadvantages of the TOD related to your master plans that you have designed? Also, after related to your projects, and if you could give an example of cities where they have been actually successfully implemented. I would request you to share your slides on your presentation, and then we can go on to a few examples from your side.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kamini. And thank you, Dr. Padmavati, and this opportunity to actually share some of my thoughts and also work experience. And I think, if I may, all right. I mean, as it was already introduced, I did start the boutique practice UDP International back in 93 in California, then moved to Hong Kong in 94. And it's based here since then with a couple rep offices, one in US and one in India. These are some of the various projects we've worked on. And as you mentioned, Professor Kamini, I think it has to do why I had practiced in a lot of different areas is because of my own background, educational background, because I had done architecture, then I went and did urban design, and then ended up with a PhD in planning and environmental design. So even though we are a boutique practice, we've almost worked on projects which a larger firm would actually have that diverse portfolio. And that's what happened over the years. So it connects, I mean, works in all, I think, areas that I'm actually quite passionate about. And these all put together actually help to shape better cities. And that's what has guided the practice as well. So transit-oriented development, I mean, master planning, then urban regeneration, heritage conservation comes in, having more sustainable development. And in terms of going to different, I mean, people might ask, why not just practice in Hong Kong? Why should you go and practice in all other countries? But this is just the journey I've led. Things happened in that way. And I've noticed by actually working in different areas, it has actually given me more exposure and understanding of how things are done in different countries. And also, so this basically gives a rough idea of the diverse work that we've done. And we've been fortunate to actually, get a few. I think you mentioned particularly about transit-oriented development, because transit-oriented development can very easily become development-oriented transit. So it becomes so focused on development, land value capture, that it becomes maybe development-oriented transit, and then you forget about the pedestrian connectivity, the last mile connectivity. That is so important. What we've done is actually I've coined TPOD instead of TOD, which is transit and pedestrian-oriented development. Because if you miss the pedestrian, you're kind of lost part of it. And so in our master plans, like this is the example of Clark Green City. It's actually in the Philippines. That we were invited to actually do this master plan, and we were, I think, we were given second. I think it's primarily to do because we're a boutique firm, but we were told that this was the most innovative master plan that they received. But the idea here was, as you can see in the master plan itself, the whole area was over 9,000 hectares, and we chose to only do the development in only 20% of the area and leave the rest for green space, not only open space, but just leave the area was about 80%, focused it on and with development around. So if you can see like the compact grid, but then with a lot of open space, and then the transit network, the entire area within the, like these are to the existing area that it would connect there, and then the people would, and also people can then use the also neighborhoods, and it's easier to actually implement as well. And the open space accessibility becomes key. And also there's a hierarchy of open space. Maybe in New York, you would think like, there's a central midtown, uptown, and this master plan, you could find those kind of developments. So the very first one would be to the east, years could develop. And it's also another thing is mixed use develops, Clark Green, just as an area for schools, an area for just residential, because then monotonous and it loses its vibrancy and it's not used throughout. And therefore other issues for safety, security, and all those will come in as well. And If you look at this is in Gurgaon, we did the master plan, it won an award, but then when it began to implementing in a way which may not realize the true value of the master plan. So this is what made me realize that actually when you do master planning, it's better for you to be involved in the architecture so that you ensure that it's implemented properly. Example of a campus master plan, and for me to even because Philippines, as you people do not, and small majority that small minority that actually takes, the poor actually take the transit, but the more middle and higher class is everybody's just driving. It's so even when the campus is developed around the open space, people were questioning why we need that open space, because it'll make us walk more, live a much better buildings. So it's kind of a weird thing that somebody would ask me about. This is an example of Amaravati. You also asked whether for new greenfield sites rather than brownfield or existing cities. I think the answer would be, to me, almost after living in Hong Kong for like 25 years, I feel it's a criminal waste of resources if a city is developed without transit. And people should be, and it's also irresponsible planning and development if transit is not in the equation. So really public transit should be part of the city plan, and it works for both existing as well as greenfield developments. I think it becomes much easier if the city is planned in a way that transit is already thought of to begin with. And if it's not, and transit doesn't need to necessarily be only metro rail. You could also graduate slowly from bus networks, BRTs to then metro rail, like a lot of cities around the world have done. And but just heavily relying on automobile traffic is, I think, irresponsible on the part of not only government, but also practitioners, but also individuals, for being just thinking about their own comfort rather than what they're actually enduring the city as a result. Because if they're 10 million population, if most of them are looking to use the automobile, the city is going to be congested, like we see most of our cities in India as well. So for the Amaravati guidelines, what we had done was, the plan was already developed, but we had come in to see how we can fill in the gap between a plan that was done earlier, and then the land pooling system actually had done the land allocation at a very detailed level. And the urban design guidelines and architectural guidelines were actually trying to bridge the gap, because there was a huge gap in between. And we had focused on a few areas in this, not only transit and pedestrian oriented development, but also waterfront, because Krishna River was at the heart of the Amaravati plan. But open space and village integration as well, because there were 29 existing villages that need to be integrated. Another project is the more recent Swachh Nagar for streets for people. But I think this particular site, we took a different take on it completely. I think the proposal was to this was a pretty degraded site with a lot of dumping and going on with really bad environmental ecological conditions. And the proposal was to actually fix a particular street, or one street on the side. And to me, approaching this, it felt like you cannot address this by just beautifying a street. You need to address the entire site. And so we didn't care whether we were going to win the award or not, but we thought if it had to be a comprehensive solution. So we took upon actually environmental restoration and transforming the entire site so that Swachh Nagar could really become a model for Vijayawada and other cities in the region. And the streets enhancement becomes part of the proposal. Before I go here, I think I wanted to address some of your questions that you mentioned about gentrification. I think gentrification, in a way, whether it is in urban regeneration or transit-oriented development, is, I think, inevitable in cities. But I think the key is, what is the pace of that gentrification? If it happens overnight, it's actually bad. But I think gradual transformation is the way that is actually something that would be better for the cities. And I think transit-oriented development, if you didn't have transit at all, or transit-oriented development, then you would end up with congested streets and cities that are terrible. And therefore, you would really end up with a worse situation. So what I would suggest is really do more transit and pedestrian-oriented development, and to be sensitive about the gentrification issues, and do it in a way that it doesn't destroy the whole neighborhoods and the networks. And your last question you asked me was about any city that has done well. I would think, maybe I'm biased, I've lived in Hong Kong for too long, 25 years. I think Hong Kong is probably one of the best cities for public transit. Where it may maybe have made excesses is what I mentioned earlier about transit-oriented development versus development-oriented transit, where it becomes excessive. But one thing good about this city is you almost, when you walk out of the house, you really think transit first. You don't think of your car. And I think if a city can shape your behavior to be more transit oriented, the city is successful. In that way, I think Hong Kong is very successful because it really has changed the behavior of this people. Even in this pandemic times, people are using public transit. The only difference, almost 99% of the people wear masks. And that is helping the city from being careful about, like, the pandemic. So I hope I've answered your questions on TOD.
Yeah, perfect, ma'am. In fact, you have been talking of this mixed land use development, and excellent example you're saying is Hong Kong. And we understand your concept, very rightly put forward. And I am also reminded of what Jan Gay had said, that if you design your streets for cars, more cars will come. And if you design them for people, then more people will come. And apparently, from the last 50 years, decades, what we have seen is we have been somewhere concentrating on more and more cars. A lot of our roads are all designed thinking it will be for the cars. And we have given a lot of, invariably, whether we want it or whether we do not want it, cars have been, highlighted everywhere and dominating the entire place. And it is now where we have realized that it is equally important to develop streets, to design streets which are pedestrian friendly, which have been ignored all the time. So I am very happy to see your projects where you have given a lot of importance to the pedestrian friendly environment that you're talking of. And also you're talking of the environment restoration in your projects. So that is it is a very good learning. Now, I think after we are done with this, we can go to your next kind of projects where you have done a lot of waterfront developments. Now, coming to the waterfront developments, there are a few cases here. I have heard of this Yamuna, biodiversity park, wherein it was planned by the DDA, the Delhi Development Authority, and wherein environmental factors were also considered. They took the help of Center for Environmental Management of Degraded Ecosystems, that is the CMDE, and it serves as an alternative habitat for migratory and resident bird species. So somewhere they have developed wetlands using the natural methods, and this entire thing built on drains, wherein otherwise you had, all the sewage coming over here. and apparently this was a hub of all the, entire city dirt coming. They have restored it, which is, the surrounding areas turned into fresh water, system, wherein it is an excellent example of wasteland restoration. And how it is going to be tested against time is to be seen. But somewhere they are talking of this entire floodplain wetland, which was in the past, and now it has transformed completely, wherein you have now existing 25 plant species which release microbes that purify the entire drainage sludge that comes over here, and you have cycle tracks and jogging tracks all around. So nice, beautifully designed uh, biodiversity park over here. And then now coming to the environmental issues, which are very important with respect to the waterfront developments, is it that the goodness of environment is a matter of fact, or is it an opinion? It is something, question. Is it, I prefer the environment and hence it is there, an opinion, or it is a matter of fact? Now, this is something which we need to question ourselves. How important have the environmental management been with respect to the ecosystem, with respect to the waterfront developments? Now, when we are talking about these harborfront developments that you are talking, the edge of water becomes very important. Maximum, thrust or maximum thrust is on the views and the vistas, and not disturbing also the cultural connectivity, which has to be retained or promoted in waterfront development projects. In terms of how do you look at it in terms of the tangible and intangible cultural heritage around the place without disturbing that, and yet exploiting maximum the vistas or the views, which is, the highlight for the waterfront developments. I can see a lot of your projects you have done on that. So how do you look at this, and how do you look at the environment, integrating the environment into how important it is with respect to your projects that you have done?
Yeah, thank you. I think, obviously, environmental restoration, sustainability is is almost dharma, our dharma. It's not like opinion or something, because we've neglected. And I'll come to our approach to design later, which is actually focused on three things, which is people, place, and planet. And I feel that most of our cities, we either ignored the people, or ignored the planet, or ignored the place, or ignored all three. And therefore, we created the mess we've created in our cities. So whenever I see cities that are just buildings and roads, people might think, oh, we've got so much progress. My heart sinks, because I feel this is a terrible way of designing cities. And cities that are good are cities that are walkable, because when you're able to walk in a city, it has to be, air quality has to be good. Water quality has to be good on waterfronts, because otherwise you get the smell, odor, and everything as well. So I think using people as a way to measure all these is actually good. And what we've done, on the other hand, is actually put ourselves locked in a car with air conditioning. So you don't need to pay attention to any of these. And therefore, we've got what we asked for. And I think Jan Gehl is I've invited him to a lecture here in Hong Kong, and it was just amazing. And he also shared, his wife actually questioned him who he was designing for, because she's a psychologist. And that's when he realized that people are the key. And that's when his focus in his life has been on people. And I think very much agree with Jan Gehl and his philosophy. And the visual here shows the central harborfront of Hong Kong, which is one of the harbor in Hong Kong is the soul of Hong Kong. But for decades, it's been like a working harbor, not for leisure and recreation. Therefore, Hong Kong's, also the harbor edge, has been something that has always been reclaimed. So people were never looking at it as the final edge because reclamation was going on for a long time under the British rule. And only it was later that the community protests, and actually there was a Society for Protection of the Harbor that was came up, and they really put court cases to stop the government from reclamations. And that's when actually the whole community and the idea, the reason was because the harbor was getting narrower and narrower, and people were worried that it would become like more like a river. And because of these, active participation from the people, government actually realized, and now it's almost like you cannot reclaim unless it's meets an overriding public need. And so Hong Kong is from one extreme to the other extreme. Now, even if you want to do a pier, it's almost like not allowed because it's reclamation. But I think you need to get a balance. But the central harbor front that you see here, the idea was to actually connect and provide a continuous promenade, as well as provide nodes along the waterfront, and also bring the harbor to the city, and as well as the city to the harbor front. And that's why this plan was very successful. It won about 3 awards, I think. One was People's Choice Award. And in fact, one of the head of the Society for the Protection of the Harbor, he told me, you get this built, I'll give you, a few $1 million just to get it done. And government had taken this plan saying that they'll do exactly the same. And then you know how it is in public sector, it becomes difficult to implement because there are so many other. And I had to then put another proposal with certain changes because the road network was fixed in certain locations, and we resubmitted. And I think they've incorporated some of these, not all, but it still has remained as one of the best examples for harborfront planning in Hong Kong. But the other thing that I think what I really feel good about is I've been on the Harborfront Commission, which was again started by the many of us who got together and asked government with, Kerry Lam, who is the chief executive at that time, was actually the development secretary. And we had asked 16 organizations got together, and we suggested that a harborfront roundtable should be formed to actually plan better harborfronts. And she came, listened to us at that time, and she said, I'll go and see what I can do. And then she came back with a Harborfront Enhancement Committee that over like a 10-year period became the Harborfront Commission. And I've been involved in both the Harbor Enhancement Committee as well as the Harborfront Commission, maybe for almost 10 years. And today, when you see the entire stretch of the central east to west of Hong Kong Harborfront is actually connected. It's promenades. We can walk from Kennedy Town all the way to Causeway Bay. It feels good when you see it actually implemented. So I think that it tells you that from a citizen activism, professional activism, you can actually influence better change for better city. And your question about environmental degradation, when I came to Hong Kong in '94, even the harbor was polluted by actually the sewage and everything going into the harbor, even at that time. And it was only then that they were instituting the harbor treatment plants. And now I think it's in a much better condition. In olden days, people used to swim across the harbor. Now they don't do it, only occasionally when, because now the water is better than before. But for an advanced city like Hong Kong, that they took so long to even get to the cleanup of the harbor is quite amazing. I would have thought they would have done it much earlier. And another good thing is when they did the Kai Tak plan, the old airport revitalization plan, they started with zero reclamation. Again, zero reclamation because of the community being vocal and saying no reclamation. And so the also another thing is the harbor connectivity study that we did, which actually also won a couple of awards, but more importantly, the government took this on board. And actually, I think what you see under the highway, this kind of a bike path and promenade, is actually going to be implemented soon. So many of these projects are finally coming to fruition, which makes it feel good that actually things are happening in the right direction. The other thing you asked me, this is about Kitec Sports Park that we worked on. Again, a great waterfront site. Part of the things we worked on trying to not only get a planning permission for the stadium height, but also do an urban design study to integrate the sports park with the surrounding area, including the waterfront, as well as the Kitec development. And that was something that was important to actually do. And I think, so in terms of environmental and ecological stewardship, this is something I think it's our dharma. We need to do it. We've ignored for so long. I think I almost feel that it's really bad on mankind that we've actually let it go this far. And I think if you have these pandemics and everything, it's our own mistakes actually over the time, ignoring everything. So at least hopefully now we should wake up and actually do the better planning and development. I hope I've answered your questions, Professor
Yeah.
Kamini.
What I have understood is also another important factor. I think people's participation is very important, right?
Yes.
With respect to the projects that you have done, especially outside, people's participation is given a lot of importance, which does not really happen here in the Indian context. Here, people do not even know what's going to happen next. What is the next development project? They have no say over here. So I think there somewhere the lapse is where that is the reason why people cannot relate to what developments are happening. They're not a part of the development that is going to happen. That is a very interesting point, which other than your other environmental aspects, which you said you have, which have not been ignored, and it is a way of life which you have incorporated. You have done a lot of work on urban regeneration. When it comes to the urban regeneration, or whether you talk of urban renewal or the restoration, or whatever models that you would apply for the urban areas, the public spaces with respect to the urban design, or the streets that you have worked on, how do you draw the line in terms of when you're talking of restoration and when you're talking of even, or for that matter, regeneration, not everything can be retained. So what has to be retained and what has to be ignored? How do you draw that line? One is that. Another thing is, now we have had, there is an excellent example, which in fact has become a role model, is the Mumbai case, the Bhindi Bazaar project, which I'm sure you must be aware of, 150-year-old, housing around 3,000 families and 1,200 businesses. And the buildings, in fact, there were around 170 death cases which have happened due to old dilapidated buildings, which have fallen, 150-year-old buildings, which were in a very bad condition. And then this Maharashtra state government has taken up the redevelopment of that somewhere around in 2009, and the work started in 2014. It is to be completed in 9 phases, wherein they have given importance to cluster development over here. And the people who live in this community have taken it very positively. Their occupation, in fact, they are the Buranis, and most of them are into hardware or some kind of a trade. And the proposal which has come to them is in terms of high-rise apartments, buildings, and the narrow roads have been converted to wider roads, where you can, and more quality open spaces, which was otherwise absent in the initial layout that they were used to it. They didn't have a social life because there was total absence of social gathering spaces for them. They didn't have, so it was, a lot of shortcomings which were initially there. and which was later on proposed, and people have taken it very positively. In fact, this model is also followed by the Himachal government for Shimla's shopping bazaar area, and even by the Karnataka government. And recently I've heard that students from Sri Lanka have been visiting this place, and they have been making case studies on this. So that is also a good example where this kind of a development has, it was incorporated, and you can put your opinions as to what has been the reason for the success. On the other hand, if you look at the Dharavi slums, now Dharavi slums, if you see, has got an interesting story with about 100 billion businesses that it makes every year. I think it is in itself a different neighborhood. And the people, the maze that you see around in Dharavi is something where people find themselves more secure. They relate it to security, and they are much more happier living in that kind of environment there. Though there has been a shift in the government's proposal. In fact, if you look at the entire slum developments, initially you had the slum clearance. From clearance to it has shifted to rehabilitation, and now if you look at the UCD model, which Hyderabad here the municipal corporation has been doing, the UCD model has been very successful, where we have focused on people's participation. Do not give them anything free of cost, because what happened in a few cases here also, even in Delhi case, you constructed apartments for the slum dwellers somewhere on the city outskirts in the fringe areas. They never ever lived there. They sold away those to a third party, and they again migrated back into the city center, creating another slum in itself. So this story has been, we have learned lessons from the past. And now what we see, you have made an interesting layout of proposal with respect to Dharavi. That is why I was reminded of that. And what, in your opinion, has been a successful model with respect to the Dharavi? Because the kind of population over here is different when we see with respect to the Bhindi Bazaar, for example, where people were of more into the trade and different. Here you have a lot of migrated population, diverse. You have people from all across the country coming here, so they do not really have that kind of. Though they are united when it comes to their projects that are to be implemented for them, but they are not. They prefer. You cannot think of development for them ignoring the socio-cultural aspects, and the kind of proposals that you would think for them cannot be the same as you would. So it is place specific, it is requirement specific, it is also to do with the socio-cultural aspects of people living over there. With respect to the Dharavi, we have also seen during the COVID case, for example, that was an excellent example how they fought the COVID case, how they fought even during the COVID times, because all other places, in fact, the Dharavi, we heard on news that it was a very good example of how the entire system worked over there. And, the hospital set up and people cooperating with each other and various ways. I think it was a very good example of how they even fought the COVID situation. And it didn't really spread the way it could have spread in a otherwise high density areas. So that they didn't really have this kind of a problem over here. So what could be the story behind this, where in spite of having so many problems, yes, yet they could address those problems, and you think of an alternative solution for them? What in your opinion could be the best solution for them? And when again talking of the various models like the regeneration or the restoration and whatever methods, which model suits in what context is what we would like to know from you. And also, how important is people's participation? Because that, if ignored, you can see the end result is a haphazard development or giving them a solution which is not at all feasible in their context.
I think, we got involved in Dharavi. I learned a lot from that process. I was actually impressed to see that how they were actually living there and actually even creating a livelihood for themselves. It's quite amazing, very entrepreneurial. I know there are a lot of issues there. But when we actually worked on this master plan as part of a competition, one of the things we looked at is the social capital of the people is extremely high. And by actually having a government initial proposal of dividing it into some 6 to 8 sectors and giving it off to developers to develop, it's probably one of the worst ways to actually develop something like Dharavi. And therefore, it didn't fly. And I think over my years of experience, I've learned one thing: unless it's a win-win situation for most of the sectors, projects don't fruition well. They don't get started or built properly. I think in this case, our approach was to really look at sensitive urban regeneration and look at the social capital as the plus rather than as the negative. And you also have, in the case of Dharavi, it's an excellent location near transit, but also very close to Bandra Kurla. It's also the center of the city. That's why there's so much pressure on the land. So what we had suggested was the land could be on lease over like a 99-year lease, so that the pressure on the land to be sold is gone. And also that reason for that long-term lease is also it's like one generation of the people can live and pass it on to the next generation. And also the marsh area nearby. What we had suggested was the people of Dharavi are so enterprising and entrepreneurial, they can be the stewards of the environment themselves by just creating the education awareness, because they do the recycling industry for Mumbai pretty much in terrible conditions, but they are really doing it. And so that, I think, was one of the things. Another was actually that they would be involved in actually the construction. And also the idea was only development at the edges where it is MMRDA land or closer to the transit stations becomes more higher density, but higher density, higher rise development, as it is already there, some of it. But in the core, it is actually more organic development, as we've shown over here in these for one particular area, where it gradually over time actually becomes regenerated. So it's not demolishing overnight. And also we had talked about multiple choices, like options for people to choose the type of building typology, which includes workspace as well as residential. And it's not like, one of the problems with the slum rehabilitation program they had is whatever they provided was not suitable for the people because they couldn't work. So they would bring everything onto the ground and actually work there. So these were the things that we kept in mind while actually developing this master plan. And I think we were told that this was probably one of the best master plans. And also the way that we've talked about, just like you have IT, special economic zone, we talked about a community economic zone, which is actually held by the people of Dharavi, but also like all the stakeholders, some of the private developers, but as well as government stakeholders, everybody to come together and make sure that this development over time is actually done properly. And if you look at this is an example from Hong Kong, which is the Graham Street Market, which through urban renewal was going to get destroyed in Hong Kong. And we opposed actually the government in this. We were invited by actually a local community group to NGO to actually prepare this plan. And we actually, for the first time, showed the people of Hong Kong what the Urban Renewal Authority was planning, which was like 4 high-rise structures right in the middle of the entire 4 blocks with a large-scale basement. And what we had done was we kind of left maybe just the edge 2 new towers, and then removed suggested that actually not to have any new development in the heart of the Graham Street area, One is Graham Street and Peel Street is the other market, street markets. These are from 1800s. So there's a lot of heritage value as well. It's almost like, the Mozanzai market in Hyderabad. And the idea here was you do regeneration in a slow incremental way in the heart of the market area. You do not build your basement, which is like, for 4 blocks. And as a result of our proposal, actually the Urban Renewal Authority had to withdraw its plan for the basement, and actually, but they still want to go ahead with the 4 towers, but they've definitely for sure have paid attention to the market, and they say they're going to somehow restore the market. So they did have softer programs as a result of this. And in fact, when we put this proposal, they were actually quite scared that we'll get the approval. And in fact, they came back to us and said, why don't you put another proposal and say that you limit the plot ratio, which is the FAR, to about 5 or 4, then we are forced to develop with less density. So that, I think, tells you that it's at a reactive mode. Rather, I would like the cities to be where they know that this is not the right thing to do, like redevelop old areas, and then they actually come up with better developments rather than giving permission to projects that are really outrageous. And so through this, we kind of ensured that there's more sensitive urban regeneration. So in terms of various models, usually in Hong Kong in olden days, they used to start off with urban redevelopment, which is bulldozing and then building high towers for luxury market. And they've learned the hard way over people again protesting against all these proposals and developments, and that now they're talking about more sensitive approach to actually look at regeneration, rehabilitation, preservation, rather than doing redevelopment first. So I think you asked about community participation, whether it is the harborfront or urban regeneration heritage. It's actually absolutely vital and important. It's not just Hong Kong, all cities around the world. If you notice, there has been change. It didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen only from government. So expecting the government somehow to do the right thing, I think, is not a good way of ensuring something good will happen. The people have to be actively involved. Professionals have to be actively involved. If I spent, say, 100% of my time in doing, say, practice and education, I spent another 100% on advocacy, participation, and everything, and worked like quite a lot during my stay here to ensure, and many people have done that in Hong Kong, to actually make the city become much more, tread a better path in terms of development. And I think that needs to happen in India more and more. I know some places it happens, but I think the professional community has a responsibility to actually garner the support and actually make it happen. And they need to persevere and do. And I think people are doing, but you need to do it for all aspects: heritage conservation, urban regeneration, waterfront developments, transit-oriented developments, everything. Only then the city will become better. And I think this is another interesting example we worked on, which is the adaptive reuse of the old police married quarters, where like a couple of the chief executives, when they were children, they used to live in these police married quarters. So it has not just because that they lived, but it's actually of heritage value. And most of these buildings, Hong Kong always wanted to demolish because of the property development pressure. And it's the community activism that stopped these buildings from being demolished. And we propose an adaptive reuse. And as a result of it, we realize it is actually forms like a cultural triangle with a couple other buildings which have been adaptively reused in Hong Kong. And I'm trying to work on that area to actually make it a precinct that is a cultural precinct that is walkable. And that's the thing we're working on now. But I think in Hong Kong, even urban regeneration, it's all through mistakes. And if you look at New York, they've demolished too. Singapore has demolished a lot of developments and learned the hard way. Some cities wake up earlier than other cities, and some don't wake up until it's too late. And I think that's the process. And we somehow need to learn from these mistakes and become actively involved. And if just doing your typical job is not enough, at least you need to provide, I think, if not 100%, at least 30% of your time to all these advocacy type of involvement, which is, I think, good for the city. And then you would have contributed to shaping a better city. I hope I answered all your questions.
Yes, ma'am. I understand you are talking of professional responsibility and that everything cannot be thrown on the government. Here, ironical is that there is a professional responsibility. Professionals do understand, but then somewhere there is lack. You said don't blame the government for everything, but then all policy decisions are taken at that level. So I think their awareness on this is equally important. Though as a community, the architects are well aware of all the facts. Heritage conservation is very important. You're talking of regeneration. We understand all this, but then somewhere public participation, which is missing, awareness is there. Protest, as you're saying, does work out. Yes, it does work out in a few cases, and it has worked out to some extent. But then somewhere the political willingness is totally missing in a lot of cases. What we understand from all your projects, the key factor to all of this is somewhere sustainability, and which you have also been giving a lot of focus in all your projects. You were also talking of somewhere the net zero buildings and the pandemic. It took us the pandemic to understand how important it is to have our buildings designed in a sustainable manner. Now, when we talk of the micro level design, we are talking of green building, the ECBC code, the minimal codes. We are also talking of green buildings, infrastructure. We are talking of everything. And at the individual level, the architect does make attempt to see that his building is green certified. They are all competing. And to some extent, it is also resolved, whether you take the commercial buildings or the residential buildings, they're all green certified. So to some extent, we are taking care at the individual level. But what happens at the macro level? The stress on infrastructure, we boast of development where we have all high-rise buildings. We are all competing, no limit to FSI, 40 floors, 50 floors, and so on. The development goes on. High-rise apartments, you have the IT crowd, who easy disposable income to them. They are all buying these. But the stress on infrastructure, there is a huge gap wherein the existing infrastructure, or even if you increase or in somewhere, it is compromised. What I'm saying is the infrastructure is somewhere compromised. It cannot take the load. And on one hand, we say, save the rocks. There is a Save the Rocks society also, which comes into action. But you see just the developments which are happening round around the place where I'm sitting. Not a square inch of land is left. We see multi-storied buildings coming up, high-rise apartment, rocks are all blasted here. So how sustainable it is? You talk of rock preservation on one hand, and on the other hand, ironically, you blast all these rocks to pave way for the new developments. So what, isn't it that holding conferences and reaching a big policy measures where everything is only in writing, that these measures have to be adopted? But what happens in reality? People's participation? No, missing. Involvement of professionals, the right people into the master plan? Missing again. So who's responsible somewhere? I think that is something, to be a question to be thought of. Maybe it is easier in your place over there, but here it is not so. Somewhere we are compromising on a lot of things. And there is a good example of, you have also dealt with net zero buildings in one of your competition projects. Here, there is India's first net zero campus, which is in New Delhi, which is the Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha University. And somewhere he has made use of the passive solar techniques here. It is also about it is not just, where he has also talked about optimizing the design decisions for the built form and also optimizing the design decisions at the site level. So the architect over here has considered the adoption of net zero is not just with one or two aspects, it is also to be done with the built form right from the site level itself. High performance building envelope, good thermal resistant walls, roofs, glazing, etc. The native landscape was proposed there, and 50% of the hard paved areas were all shaded. So it is a good example with regards to the first net zero campus that has come up here. Could you throw some light on the sustainable measures that you're talking with respect to the micro level planning as to what can be incorporated, and then we can go to the net zero. You have also talked about the post-COVID design. Now, another thing what we have realized is this COVID has taught us a lot of, it was like a big awakening thing which has happened. Are these COVID the solutions that we think of now? Is it something, a temporary phase which is going to go away, or something which we need to be prepared for the future? You can see a lot of office buildings lying vacant, and from the high density to the lower density way of life is what it has taught us should be the demand. Social public spaces redefined with the COVID, office spaces, large, huge office spaces lying vacant. So can there be some kind of a regeneration with respect to these office buildings for the future, which, you can call it as vacant, space utilization, or what terminology that you would have for it. Is there somewhere where these spaces can be utilized? Or do they lie vacant for how long? Because the concept of work from home is picking up. A lot of IT offices have realized the importance of, their cost cutting by way of allowing their people to work from home. So how do you look into all of this, the sustainability, the, post-COVID, what the COVID has taught us, the design, the regeneration of the vacant places which are lying vacant now, the office buildings, especially with respect to the office buildings?
I think sustainable development is actually very important, and I think a couple things that I had actually done is with the Urban Land Institute, actually developed the 10 principles for sustainable development of new, approach for new development. The reason this was done is partly also to showcase in Hong Kong how to do things and how not to do like these massive large scale developments which become almost like space stations that come and land in the city, and they destroy all the connections to the vicinity. And what the approach we had used here was actually to bring all the key decision makers. It's almost like getting all your Reliance and Tatas and everybody to the table, bring also the government department people as well as the community, every academia, everybody to the table and discuss about the issue, how these large scale developments are becoming massive and should be actually be integrated. And then together we came up with these 10 principles. So they're not my principles, they're actually all the people who got involved. And this actually was very well received. And it's, even government calls me about sending them a copy, because initially they were upset, obviously, because, we had a launch of this report in Hong Kong during lunchtime, and then one day, and then the government officer came and said, "We do a very good job. Why are you telling us we are not doing good?" And I just told them, in fact, I didn't have to reply to that answer, the question, because everybody else who were participating, came back and said, can't you see what she's trying to do to make Hong Kong even better? And that was the message came from the participants, because basically what we're trying to do is push the bar up. And if Hong Kong is good for certain things, but at the same time, I noticed that the new developments that were happening were actually making the urban grid disappear, and they're becoming isolated, and they were not integrating to the neighboring districts. And therefore, that's the reason this was done. That led me to Philippines, because I was actually presenting the 10 principles of Hong Kong in Philippines, and immediately in Manila, they people pulled me aside and they said, you need to come and do this in Philippines. So that started our journey in Philippines, actually. But in the Philippines, 10 principles was a larger issue. I think it'll relate more to India. Actually, both would relate. One, you can even call it as a guide for even transit-oriented development, because they tend to be larger scale. But the Manila one talks about city development at a more sustainable level at a city scale, and it talks about also the short-term, long-term, and medium-term and longer-term strategies that go into. And it was a little bit more difficult to work in the Philippines compared to Hong Kong, which I'm very familiar with, and the issue was more focused, whereas in Philippines it was much broader. It was about the city, and we had to do one-on-one interviews with a lot of stakeholders, and as well as focus group discussions and workshops. And they told me that was the first time they actually sat at a table to discuss urban issues. And they were thanking me for actually making it happen. So it was actually looking at Makati, which is one CBD, and Bonifacio Global City, which is another CBD, and how to integrate all of that to make sure that Manila's urban core would be more sustainable. I showed you the police married quarters. This is the building earlier. Central Market, which is launched recently. We had the Happy Cities event from here. And Taigun, which is the former Central Police Station compound. So when we were doing the adaptive reuse proposal for this, we realized actually these two other buildings together form a perfect triangle, actually. And then we coined the cultural triangle. And at that time, people thought what was I talking about? And 10 years later, they realized actually what I was talking about actually makes perfect sense, because what I was trying to do is heritage conservation beyond buildings, going to a district level, precinct level, and creating a walkable precinct, which is culturally rich. And we had to engage a lot of, the district council actually funded this, and we engaged. And if you can see from the people, they're all local grassroots Hong Kong people, a lot of them elderly. Mind you, they walked along this entire area, then came and sat for 2 to 3 hour workshop and actually shared their stories, worked on, and then thanked me at the end of it, saying that it's good you're doing this initiative. We hope to see a much more walkable precinct here. And even the Walkable Cities event we had, they actually sang songs about heritage conservation and everything. It was very heartwarming. And we also did some placemaking events as well as part of that. And another area, completely different context in San Diego, where we worked on, again, the whole idea of public engagement was, and bringing the community together was important. And I remember the Port of San Diego telling me, nobody comes for these events, but actually we made it quite successfully. And a plan that people were working on for 17 years with no consensus, we were able to handle it in 6 months with proper community engagement, and got it approved by the board, and it went into environmental review. And it was extremely hostile when I first went and had the first meeting, because they're looking at who is this Indian lady trying to come and tell us what we need to do in San Diego. And from that situation to bring it to a plan that is approved, and they've agreed, and they've actually thanked me for making it happen. it took a lot of work. And I had to go one-on-one with all these stakeholders, talk to them and ask them about to make sensible choices and be responsible. And what they were trying to do is they were trying to plan for a port's land without the port of San Diego being involved. And all I did was ask them, if you had your own land and if you had somebody else designing and telling you what to do, would you like it? And they looked at me and said, yeah, what you're saying makes sense. And I said, that's why it's a problem. You need to be working with the port together, come up with a consensus, a balanced land use plan. And here we were trying to balance the marine operations, as you can see in the figure on the top. It's a lot of like these cars that are brought into the area and they're reworked with, radio fittings and all these other things. And then the cars are shipped to all parts of US. So these are imported cars, sometimes many of the times that come in, and then they are then reworked and sent. So that is one use. Another use, competing use, is the marina itself that wants to do more commercial development. And also this is a park near the waterfront and the community wants accessible park, open space. So we had to then bring all these stakeholders together and come up with a plan that is a win-win for all the stakeholders so that the community has the parks and the accessible parks and areas that they can get. The marina and commercial development can happen at the same time. The marina operations can happen. So it was quite an interesting project, but also a completely different context. The net zero you talked about, this was something that we recently got, a few of us got together where from various companies and actually attempted this. And we actually got a merit award. The idea here, you have your glass towers for office buildings. And we think it's very fancy and it's good, but actually all we are doing is boxing it up. And you are relying on air conditioning and everything, which is not necessarily good for the environment or for the people. So what we were trying to do is push the boundary here with this design to actually open up even the towers so that you have like balcony spaces and open areas and trying to get like a much more daylight as well as air ventilation into the tower so that the air conditioning and can be minimized. The use can be minimized as much as possible. And the whole working space becomes much more a combination of not just these elite offices for the top offices, but it's more shared offices with co-working and the sorts. And I think you had some questions about a lot of office spaces that are vacant. I think and also you talked about the COVID, which I'll share in a bit, is I think looking at alternate uses for office spaces. A lot of offices, actually, the large MNCs are actually looking at doing part of their offices as co-working spaces and allowing others to come in, because what they find with that kind of interaction, actually more innovation happens. So I think these IT parks, what you have in Cyberport, which are all these enclaves, like gated communities, should go. You should not have these IT parks in that mode. In fact, I remember seeing a good model in Cebu, which is actually an IT park, but it's also a thriving, vibrant area because all the security happens first floor building above and not the entire area. So the whole area is accessible ground level. And they have like one of the most popular nightclub also over there because everybody works in weird hours. And I think building responsibly and also looking at what is the impact of the buildings on the city? What kind of a city are you giving back rather than what you're taking away from the city? These need to be looked at, and not with just private agendas, but actually what is the common good you're able to give. And I hope with the net zero thing that Hong Kong is actually going to push this forward with the Green Building Council here. And I know a lot of the IGBC is quite active in India. A lot of this is done. But at the same time, you have Hyderabad and other cities flooding in, you should not be, if you did it right, you shouldn't be having these situations. So the fact that we are having these situations, we are obviously not doing our planning or designing right or development right. We are building in the wrong places and we are building it wrong to begin with. So these questions need to be asked, and we need to come up with better solutions to make things better for us. So the one of the things I'd like to share, I hope we're not going too long, the smart and sustainable city framework that we've developed, where because when you talk about smart city, everybody is thinking, oh, somehow technology is magically going to address every problem we have and the city would become smart. I disagree with that. I'm not saying technology is bad at all, but I'm saying you need to have a good planning and design with smart thinking as a core requirement before you talk about technology being the enabler. Technology is important, but not just on a bad plan. And also the focus should be on people, place, and planet, as I've talked about earlier, but also the culture, heritage, image, and identity. This then will make the city, much more unique and better context sensitive, and address all the different aspects from living to mobility, infrastructure, governance, environment, economy. And I also believe that we need to bring in spirituality and consciousness into the picture. If we don't, we are actually working in a vacuum. And I think part of the reason why we are doing a lot of mistakes in cities, the way we develop, is because we lost touch with our connection with that we are also part of nature, and we've lost that connect with nature. And that's why that spiritual connection actually would help. And also with COVID, this is something, if we cannot stop and rethink, and we want to just go back to business as usual, because I've heard many people say that, or we're just waiting for COVID to go and then we are just going to go back to traveling and working as usual. We should, I think, be ashamed of ourselves. Really, what we are being reminded here with COVID is we've done some serious mistakes in the way we've done things, and we really need to own up to it and pause and rethink and make sure that at least now we move forward with developing our cities and communities to truly create better places for the city, not only at a city level, community level, but also personal level, by making the right choices. And I think some of the things that we may want to look at is a hybrid version of having the right balance between work. I really don't think everybody needs to be going to work 100% of the time and everybody needs to be in the office all the time. I think if we keep the environment as something that we need, it's our dharma to actually safeguard the environment, we should make better choices. And just imagine if you cut the amount of travel, if you work part from home and part from, I know personal connections are important, being together in the same space is important, but don't need to be 100% of the time. And if we do this hybrid option, whether it is for teaching, whether it is for working, whether it is for leisure, everything, we can save our environment quite well by cutting down on the traffic in the city and actually coming up with better solutions, and also reducing our dependency on or not only on automobiles, but with COVID, we've learned how to use the digital infrastructure much better. It was always there. It just needed something for COVID to happen for us to realize we can do all these things. So wake up, it's a good time to wake up and actually use. And I really hope net zero goes in all the way, not just to the buildings, to the point where, like you talk about organic food. Why can't all food be organic? Why do you need the label organic? why should you label green buildings? Why are we not building only green buildings? If it becomes the norm, I think we can actually, that should be our goal. So that, I mean, I know these certifications, everything help, but even when I was taking my lead exam, what I felt was everything we were doing quite well before, we forgot, and we are reminded that we need to do it again. It's like just having openable windows in your office. We had those before, we closed them through curtain walling and everything. Now we are trying to get back. So I think reminding ourselves what are the choices we need to make and how we can actually come up with better cities that are truly places that we all will be happy together to live, and not do it at the cost of the environment should be our dharma. And I think India, there's no reason why India cannot do better and showcase to the world. Maybe this is our opportunity.
Excellent, ma'am. I think the 3 Ps that you're talking of is something, where we can relate to and remember it. And now I understand why you have got this label of thought leader, where you propagate, you preach, and you practice the same. It is equally important that we educate all the stakeholders, because everyone involved needs to be aware. And even if one of the stakeholder is missing in this loop of awareness, somewhere we go wrong. We cannot reach the goal which you are talking of. So all the stakeholders need to be educated, like you're talking of the hybrid model with respect to work, with respect to education or anything. It is important that all stakeholders come into the picture. If it is fine with you, shall we take a few questions from the participants, madam?
Sure.
I have got a few questions on WhatsApp. There is one question from architect Manjusha. She is asking, to what extent can we rely on climatic computational softwares for climatic analysis to be considered at urban level with respect to reducing the heat gain or create wind channels within?
I think, I mean, people are using all these technologies and analysis for, to solve heat island effects, and, especially with densities, and coming up with climate adaptation and also climate responsive designs. I think it's important, but at the same time, I think we need to look at also how it relates to people. Like I'll share with you, like, we in Hong Kong's case, they do air ventilation assessment with at an urban scale, right? And the the air ventilation assessment has gone to a certain degree that they are only focusing on the air ventilation assessment to kind of dictate how the city is profiled in terms of its building heights or whatever. Then, but the urban design is not looked at the same time. What's happening at street level continuity is not looked at. So you cannot rely on one and forget the other. So I think what you need to really do, that's why I came up with this people, place, and planet. And everybody asked me, what about profit? Profit, you don't need to label it. People are going to look at, but if you don't do this, you're actually going to, longer term, you're destroying the planet. So you can forget about your profit, because it might be a short-term gain at a long-term loss. And I think even for corporates, right, companies like your Apples and everything earning $1 billion of revenue, you really need corporations that are regenerative, that they can give back to society, not just through CSR. Now people are talking of ESG in a truly responsible manner. And I think just imagine if all the corporations took upon to actually do that, or at least have some to lead the cause, you would have a better environment. So I think environmental analysis assessments are important, but don't forget the human side of it, of what kind of places we are actually creating. Otherwise, you can get lost in that angle that you might again create other problems as well. Maybe you're on mute, ma'am.
Okay, right. I think that's done. I'm not sure if any more questions are there from the participants. I guess you have answered most of the questions that would have otherwise come from anyone. And very good, excellent learning from you. We're looking forward to more associations with you, ma'am, in future as well. And if there are any more questions which come on later from the participants, we will put them across in our alumni group, which can be taken up later. So with this, I think we can end the session. And if in case I am not getting any more, even in the group, I think we can call it off. And thank you, ma'am, Sujata ma'am. Thanks a lot for the right focus, giving the right direction. And as everyone says, aptly called thought leader, thought provoking. It was an excellent presentation. And thanks to all the participants who have joined. We shall share the recorded version of this on YouTube also. So in case for those who have missed out, they can watch the recorded session on YouTube later. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, Professor Kamini and Dr. Padmavati, for this opportunity. It's my pleasure to share. And I wanted to end with one note. Urban design education is important not only to architects, engineers, politicians, decision makers, everybody. And I really think if people can get 101, just like Management 101, Urban Design 101, for a wider section of society, people will become much more sensitive to better city building and making better decisions. With that, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.